So, The Outer Worlds has been sitting in my Epic Games library for a while now. One of those games I always meant to play, but never quite got round to it. But with The Outer Worlds 2 right around the corner, I figured it was finally time to see what I'd been missing. Mainly, I wanted to know whether playing the first one actually adds anything before jumping into the sequel. Does it set things up, or are they separate storylines entirely? Short answer, they're separate. But it got me thinking, even if it's not essential for the sequel, is it worth playing The Outer Worlds in 2025? For anyone who's never touched it, The Outer Worlds is a space-themed RPG that kind of scratches that Fallout itch, only without being a Bethesda game. It's made by Oblivion, who actually worked on Fallout New Vegas, so there's definitely some familiar DNA here. It's got a mix of exploration, dialogue choices, and player freedom that fans of Fallout usually love. Honestly, that's partly why I've been hesitant to start. I'm a massive Fallout fan, and every game in the series has a special place for me. So whenever I look at The Outer Worlds, I wondered if it could really live up to that legacy, or if it would feel like a lighter imitation. This actually was my first proper playthrough, though I've seen a few creators stream it before. Visually, it always caught my attention. That mix of retro, futuristic design and bright planetary backdrops, but I wasn't sure if it would have the same depth or atmosphere that keeps me hooked in games like Fallout 3 or New Vegas. Those older games might be clunky by today's standards, but the stories still hold up beautifully, and that's a tough act to follow. Going in, I didn't expect The Outer Worlds to feel dated. It's only 5 years old after all. I was curious to see how it would hold up next to modern RPGs. Would it still feel engaging, or would it show its age in gameplay and design? That's what I wanted to find out. So the big question I'm hoping to answer in this review is simple. Should you play The Outer Worlds before The Outer Worlds 2, or if it's one of those cases where you can skip straight to the second installment without missing much? Let's dive in and find out. The Outer Worlds throws you straight into this alternate future where corporations have basically taken over space. You play as the Stranger, someone who's been frozen in cryo-sleep for decades aboard a lost ship called the Hope, only to be woken up by a slightly mad scientist named Phineas Wells. It's a great setup, and from the moment you land on the first planet, Edgewater, you're pulled into this beautifully dystopian world. Halcyon isn't the utopia humanity dreamed of. It's a corporate nightmare where everything from people's jobs to their food is owned and regulated by massive companies. It's bleak, but weirdly fascinating to explore. Halcyon itself really holds up, even compared to newer sci-fi RPGs. There's something captivating about its design and atmosphere. Every settlement feels like it's got its own little story going on, packed with details, propaganda posters, and characters just trying to survive under the corporate control. It's one of those worlds that instantly feels alive, where you can lose hours just walking around and listening to people talk about their daily struggles. That first step into Edgewater in particular really grabbed me. The way the town looks worn down but still functional, all wrapped in this eerie corporate optimism. It perfectly sets the tone for what's to come. What surprised me the most is just how well the game's corporate satire still fits today. In a world where big companies have more influence than ever, The Outer World feels almost more relevant now than it did 5 years ago. The humour still lands. It's sharp, dry and self-aware, without ever feeling forced. You'll see people literally quoting the company slogans in everyday conversation, and while it's funny, there's also this uncomfortable truth about it, and making you think about the systems it's mocking. Story-wise, I found myself genuinely invested in the main plot, especially the mysteries around the Hope and what will happen to the colonists still trapped aboard. That thread was what kept me pushing forward. Supporting characters were a bit hit and miss for me. Some didn't really leave much of an impression, but I did enjoy Parvati the most. There's something genuinely endearing about her personality and her personal story, and the way the companions interact with each other during dialogue adds a lot of depth. Those small conversations between your crew, whether they're bantering or disagreeing, makes the whole world feel a bit more real. What I think The Outer Worlds does really well is balancing its tone. It deals with some serious topics, corporate control, moral choices, inequality, but it never gets too heavy. The humour gives you a breath between the darker moments, and that contrast actually makes the serious stuff hit harder. You can see how different people react to living under the system, from those who have given up hope to others quietly rebelling in their own ways. It's a clever bit of world building that doesn't just tell you the colony's broken, it shows you through its people. As for how it feels to play now, I think it still holds up really well. The pacing and the writing are strong throughout. There are definitely times where it leans heavily into dialogue, and I did catch myself wishing for moments just to explore those gorgeous environments instead of talking through every choice. But to be fair, every line of dialogue feels purposeful. It feeds into the story, the world, or your moral decisions in some way. Knowing that what you say can shape how the whole colony ends up gives those conversations real weight, and that's something that newer games struggle to pull off. So if you're completely new to the series, the story doesn't feel dated at all. If anything, it feels like it's aged into the themes even better. A witty, sharp, and surprisingly grounded take on what happens when corporations literally own everything. When it comes to gameplay, The Outer Worlds still feels solid overall, though not without its rough edges. The gunplay and combat can feel a bit clunky at times. I played this on controller, and the aiming doesn't feel quite as fluid as I'd hoped. It's not terrible, but it doesn't have that crisp responsiveness you'd expect from newer shooters. To be fair though, the combat isn't really what draws me into these kind of games. I approach them a bit like I do with Metal Gear. I'll fight when I have to, but if there's a clever way to avoid it, I'll usually take that route. And that's one of the nice things here. As you level up, you can build your character to shape encounters around your playstyle. Certain attribute points can make enemies hesitate or run away during fights, which gives you this extra bit of tactical freedom, without needing to rely purely on gun skill. Where this game truly shines for me though is the dialogue and choice system. Just like I mentioned earlier, the decisions you make really do matter. The reputation system tracks how factions perceive you, and that can completely change how missions unfold, or even the entire story ends. Without giving any spoilers, there are 3 main types of endings, and both main and side quests can influence which one you get. That gives you real purpose to exploring side content because it's not just filler. Every quest adds weight to the bigger picture. I also really like how the companions have their own personal quests. They help develop their characters and build a stronger connection with your crew. And it's a nice touch that makes those side quests feel just as important as the main story. The freedom to approach quests your own way is something that I really appreciate. You can go in guns blazing, sneak through like a ghost, or talk your way out of just about any situation if you invest in the right skills. Personally, in these sort of games, I always end up stacking points into charisma and intelligence. I'd rather sweet talk my way out of trouble, but if someone gives me a funny look, yeah, I'll happily pull that trigger too. That flexibility gives the game great replay value, because every playthrough can feel completely different depending on the kind of character you build. Most of the core gameplay systems still feel surprisingly modern. One feature I really like is the floor system. There's a certain twist that lets you take on certain character weaknesses, like gaining fear for a specific creature type after taking too much damage from them, in exchange for extra perk points. It's a clever way of giving your character more personality and makes each run feel personal. The skills system itself is nicely balanced too. You've got the standard categories, melee, range, speech, leadership, and so on. But once you hit a skill cap of 50, those groups split into more refined subcategories. It's a cool way to let you specialize and fine-tune your builds as you progress. I also like that your companions contribute to your stats. For example, Parvati adds an extra 10 points into engineering, and those extra points can actually affect what options you have in dialogue or repairs. It makes your team feel more like part of your build and not just tag-alongs. If I had one real complaint about the gameplay, it's the travel system. Moving between planets feels a bit underwhelming. You don't actually get to pilot the ship, the Unreliable. You just select your destination from the menu and instantly travel there. It gets the job done, but it misses that immersive moment of taking off, breaking orbit, and seeing the stars stretch out in front of you. That's something games like No Man's Sky and even Starfield really nailed. That sense of scale and wonder when you leave the planet's surface. I'm not saying I'd have the skill to actually pilot the Unreliable, but that moment of connection to the universe is something I think I really missed. Overall, I'd say the gameplay systems still hold up well today. The combat might not be the game's strongest point, but it doesn't need to be. What defines The Outer Worlds isn't how tight the shooting feels, it's how the choices, dialogue, and progression systems make you feel like a true protagonist. You shape the story, you influence the world, and that's what role-playing is all about, right? Feeling like you actually matter in the story that you're part of. Visually, The Outer Worlds still looks incredible. I know I've said it a few times in my recent reviews, but games are really in a golden age of presentation right now. And even 5 years later, The Outer Worlds still holds up beautifully. It's a game that constantly made me stop and just look around. Every planet, every settlement, every stretch of alien sky feels carefully crafted. There were so many times I caught myself just wandering off the path to take in the scenery, looking up at the glowing nebulae or the way that the light hits the terrain, and it still managed to take my breath away. Technically, it's rock solid too. Performance felt smooth throughout my playthrough, and the game runs incredibly well on modern hardware. I didn't run into any bugs or crashes, which I think is worth mentioning, even if it's what you'd expect half a decade after launch. The only real visual oddities I noticed were the occasional stiff facial expressions during conversations. But honestly, pretty mild compared to what I've seen in other games. Mass Effect Andromeda, I'm looking at you. For the most part, everything feels stable and polished. What I really like is how bright and stylized the game looks. Most sci-fi RPGs go for that gritty, desaturated aesthetic, cold metal corridors and endless darkness, but The Outer Worlds does the opposite. It's colourful and full of life. Each planet feels distinct, with bold colours and vibrant lighting that match the game's tongue-in-cheek tone. The sense of humour and corporate satire you see in the writing is reflected perfectly in how the world looks. It's like the visuals themselves are winking at you, saying, yeah, Things are messed up here, but hey, at least it's pretty. That mix of cheerful colour and dark themes makes the whole thing feel unique in a genre that's often quite serious. The voice acting is another area that fits the balance nicely. You play as a silent protagonist, so most of what you hear comes from the supporting cast, and they do a great job of keeping the tone light but believable. No one's delivering Oscar-worthy monologues, but that's not really the point here. The performance matches the game's personality. The dialogue is sharp, often funny, and sometimes a bit ridiculous in the best way. There were a few moments where characters made comments that caught me off guard, particularly from someone from Stellar Bay, but for the most part, it all fits the world's eccentric sense of humour. As for soundtrack, it's subtle but effective. It doesn't demand your attention, but it's always there quietly filling out the atmosphere. It hums along in the background, tying everything together without overpowering the dialogue or sound effects. You probably won't remember specific tracks, but you'll definitely notice if it was missing. It gives the world this gentle rhythm, just enough to make exploration feel immersive, especially if you're travelling across open landscapes or walking through bustling colonies. It's not aiming for that big, cinematic John Williams style punch. It's more understated, and I think it works perfectly for the kind of game it is. Overall, The Outer Worlds still feels fantastic from a presentation standpoint. The visuals are stunning, the art direction feels timeless, the voice work brings the world to life, and everything runs smoothly without a hitch. It's a good reminder that art direction and thoughtful design age far better than flashy graphics alone. And here, 5 years later, Halcyon still looks and sounds as good as ever. Just want to take a moment to ask, if you're enjoying this review, please drop a like and consider subbing to the channel. Thank you! One of the biggest strengths for The Outer Worlds is how much your decisions actually matter. And even after all this time, that still holds true. Every choice you make feels like it ripples through the story, shaping the world around you in ways that genuinely stick. It's not just a case of picking the good or the bad options and watching a meter move. The game constantly challenges you to think about the kind of person you want to be in this corporate-controlled universe. Right from early on in Edgewater, you're thrown into situations that have no perfect answer. Without giving anything away, there's a big decision around who ends up running the town's cannery, and it's one of those moments that really sets the tone for how much weight your actions carry. You're not just making choices for the sake of it. You're shaping people's futures, deciding who gets power and who loses it. It makes even the smaller faction side quests feel meaningful because you know they'll all come back around to affect your ending in some way. What really surprised me wasn't necessarily the decisions themselves, but how smoothly the story adapts to them. The writing and the pacing handle your choices so naturally that the consequences feel earned. I didn't find myself shocked by what happened, or impressed by how believable it all was. I've never been bothered by gunplay in these kind of games. What I love is the politics, the moral choices, and seeing how people react when you challenge the system. Even the smallest dialogue options can create bigger shifts later, and that's something The Outer Worlds still does exceptionally well. It's one of those games where a casual line you drop early on might come back to haunt you later on, and that's what makes it feel alive. The faction dynamics are another layer that gives the world depth. Again, it's not something completely new. Games like Fallout 3 did it with the Brotherhood of Steel and other groups, but The Outer World handles it in the same satisfying balance. You're constantly walking a fine line between keeping the corporate world happy and supporting smaller, struggling factions that want change. It's this ongoing balancing act that keeps the side quests engaging. Every time you make progress with one group, you're potentially upsetting another, and it adds quiet tension to every decision. It's not groundbreaking, but it works because everything feels interconnected. Like every choice ties into the bigger web of Halcyon's fate. As for the ending, I'll admit, I wasn't thrilled with the one I got. No spoilers, but there were a few decisions I made along the way that I ended up regretting. I thought I was doing the right thing at the time, and then when it came to the outcome, it stung a bit. But honestly, that's the beauty of a game that's built across choices. The frustration I felt wasn't because it was bad, it was because it made me care. It made me want to go back, replay it, and see what would happen if I'd done things differently. That's when you know a choice system works, when it sticks with you long after the credits roll and you're already thinking about your next run. The Outer Worlds still nails that feeling of agency, that sense that your version of the story is uniquely yours. It reminds you that role-playing isn't just about building stats or choosing dialogue options. It's about living with the consequences of those decisions and shaping a world that feels like it reacts to you. And even in 2025, that still feels fresh. The Outer Worlds in 2025 still feels like a solid pickup, especially if you enjoy story-driven sci-fi RPGs with a satirical twist on corporate greed and capitalism. It's not essential to play before The Outer Worlds 2, the stories aren't directly connected, but I'd say it's worth diving in if you already own it or have been meaning to try it. Think of it as a great way to get a feel for the universe that Obsidian has built. It still carries that unmistakable Obsidian charm, the quirky characters, sharp dialogue, and choices that actually mean something. Though I will say the combat hasn't aged quite as gracefully. It does the job, but it's not as satisfying or fluid as some of the studio's more recent work. If you're wondering what you'd miss by skipping straight to the second installment, not much in terms of plot, but you'd miss out on understanding the tone and the world building that makes this universe special. It's a game that quietly pulls you into its atmosphere and writing rather than big flashy moments. On my personal scale, I'm going to say try it on a sale. The story and world design are absolutely worth the experience, but I'd hesitate to recommend paying full price for it today. If it's sitting in your library or you grabbed it during the free promo on the Epic Games Store, this is your sign to finally give it a go. In short, The Outer Worlds still holds up. It's clever, funny, and packed with meaningful choices that make every playthrough feel personal. And that's it. Thank you for watching. I'd love to hear your take. Have you played The Outer Worlds recently? And are you planning to pick up the second installment? If you found this review helpful, please drop a like and consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow.